So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. And today, we're going to talk about simplicity. Simplicity is the secret ingredient to an awesome game. I have often struggled with this ingredient and have added a lot of other things instead. So today we're going to talk about how a basic idea can lead to a better game and overall a cooler experience.
In programming, there's this concept of what we call the minimum viable product. Programming can be difficult. Sometimes it's hard to, you can spend a lot of time working on something and get to the end and realize it's not worth it. So what you should do instead in programming is make the smallest thing you can, take what problem you need to solve and go, okay, well, what's the simplest way we can start on that? Just get a prototype going just to see if it's even close, if it's viable, the minimum viable product. Separately, one of my favorite quotes that I repeat to people is, I believe it was at the end of a famous letter that one person wrote to another a long time ago when that was a thing that happened more commonly and was far more important. It was a very long letter, and at the end, one of the quotes was, I'm sorry this letter has been so long, I didn't have enough time. And I think that a lot of times we underestimate that simplicity doesn't mean less of anything. It just means the least you can get away with. Again, even saying it that way, right, almost brings the implication of like laziness. But the idea is, what are the fewest elements you can put out there to create what you want to create, to make what you want to make, but still like to get that point across, but not to overdo it. And I think working toward that minimum viable product is the first step in creating many things. Because if you start too big, and to go back to the programming analogy, you spend a year working on this big thing that's going to solve this problem. That goes away in a year. You know, the market shifted and you weren't able to shift with it because they were looking for something different. Turning that over to players, if you give them this very complicated crafting system, but all they want to do is be able to make special arrows, but you didn't put that in there, you should spend your time working on the special arrow thing and not necessarily continuing to create maybe a part of the game nobody's using, for example.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, especially when it comes to RPGs specifically, that when you are creating something as the game master or as the system designer, that you are often only making the first layer of what this thing will eventually become. Because as you continue to play in the world you're building or play in the system that you're making, the players and you will sort of automatically expand and iterate on the ideas that you put forward. So if you come out as the world builder and you start out with this whole complicated system of hierarchies and rules and systems and all these things, you don't really have anywhere to go. So it just kind of becomes the players just playing out down the path that you've sort of built in this complicated way for them to follow, rather than sort of giving them the opportunity to like expand and explore the idea. So if your idea, you know, you originally had this idea for this like crazy religion and there's this holiday and there's this rules and there's this and there's that and there's this and there's that. If somebody comes to play and they're like, I want to play a person who follows that religion, suddenly they have like this manual that they have to follow to do that. Whereas if you just sort of say like, all right, I have this idea for this religion, and their main idea is that they want to help people that deserve it. That's the main tenet of the religion. And then, you know, in session one, the guy who's playing that character does something like, oh, that's kind of a cool aspect of the religion. Maybe they do have like a tool that they carry that's just like part of the uniform, because the player had one of those and it just kind of hit you like a cool idea. And then in session 3, they go to a church and the church is doing a service in a particular way. And you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe that's just how the service works, you know. And you've given yourself and the player the opportunity to basically build the world that'll best serve the game, rather than trying to make the game bend and force into this framework that you built for it. So it's just knowing that ideas will constantly be iterated upon by the players and by you, and will constantly sort of continue to expand as more details and nuances are added to them. It's much better and more efficient to start smaller, knowing that it will grow to the place that you want it to be, rather than trying to start with the whole thing finished and then have it be this rote process that people just have to sort of robotically follow through the thing that you've made, rather than allowing them to sort of pave who their character is or what this place is and so on.
I'm a serial complicator. And so if you want to look at why I do it, I kind of try to ask myself why. It's because I want to make the best thing I can for the players. I want them to have the most fun, and I want them to love it, and I want the time that they spend at the table to really be worth it. And I think that's what most of us are doing. We want to make something really good. And RPGs are so different in how they're good. And that's a thing we need to remember. And the reason why The Lord of the Rings is so awesome is because someone had a chance to write it and rewrite it and rewrite it and craft this thing. We instead are going to write something together. So the key is starting with the simple idea. There is this villainous tax collector who is overtaxing the town. And leaving it at that is, in my opinion, better than saying, oh, and then there's this secret because of this thing, and he's funding and financing this, and that is making the sheriff in the other town upset. And what we start doing is we start plotting in our heads, and we think it's going to be cool because why? We want the players to have fun. We want this reveal. We want them to go, ooh, that was neat. What I've learned is starting with that simple seed, and Jeff said it masterfully, which is if you start with that simple thing that becomes complex because you explore it, it's always going to be better than starting with that complex thing that you can't really explore because it's too complex. So the next time you're making an encounter and you're trying to think of how to make it cooler, it doesn't mean add more stuff. It probably means take some stuff away. One of the biggest examples of this is a trope. Tropes, if you don't know what they are patterns in storytelling and media that are so common that they have a name. If you just Google tropes, there are a lot of really cool sites about it. Because a trope is just a pattern, but the art form of you playing this game is going to change that trope immediately. So I would even say your homework is go find a trope. Grab it, and that's your starting point. You don't change it. You just present that trope to the players, and I can promise you that in almost every case, they will actually relish the familiarity and play off of it because they'll say, oh, okay, I kind of get it. Kind of like a Robin Hood thing. Yes, kind of like a Robin Hood thing. Okay, cool. So then, oh, okay, now I understand. Instead of me presenting them this whole elaborate tale about Robin Hood, well, and then there's this band of people that are in the forest. Now they get to say, well, what if instead of this, it's this, and that can be my character. Perfect. 2-3 sessions in, the complexity has built very organically, and everyone loves it because they were a part of it. So I got to take my own advice all the time on this. I got to constantly remind myself, but simple is better, and letting it get complex and nuanced together is really my favorite way to play now.
Yeah, and I really wanted to tie those two things together in the sense that, like you said, Tim, you're creating something to then work on with the players, right? You're making some part of it. But what's really cool about that is exactly what you described. The things that need to emerge from those things, those elements together, does. Oh, what if what if that's how they worship? What if they do have that tool? Because it makes sense. And we also call that sometimes leaving empty space. And it's the same kind of thing. But that idea is by iterating, again, saying that the same way, you're allowing the players to fill those spaces with things that make sense in the moment, rather than, as you said, Tim, filling all the spaces yourself, and then the things don't make sense. So yeah, it is such a really important concept, and you should never be afraid with having too little, because even in cases and I can say this for sure, any GM I've ever spoken to that has gone into a game without prepping has had some of the most fun they've ever had. Because it's not the same fun as a prepped perfectly, like there's a time and a place for that, but it's like you would think that you'd fail as a GM with no prep, but it's simply not the way it works, you know. And it can be a fun little, I want to say, litmus test for the tolerance of failure in role-playing games if you prep as little as you possibly can and play and learn that the players are just going to iterate on your ideas and everybody will arrive there at the end rather than the GM trying to catch everybody up the whole session.
So in the comments, it would be great to hear, you know, what is the simplest idea you've ever run with as a GM that you were just blown away by? Like, wow, I thought this was too simple. And then what's the opposite? What's that overcomplicated thing that you thought was a masterstroke but was just confusing, or you're like, oh man, this is way too much. But anyone is also welcome to throw simple tropes in there that we can all pull from as like, yeah, I'm going to use that for my next fight, or I'm going to use this as my next villain. We're Tabletop Terrors. We truly love, creativity, fun, and tabletop games. So if you love those kinds of things, subscribe to the channel. We also have a Patreon. If you're interested in either getting some of the little games we've made, learning about game design, or asking us very specific questions, you can check that out. But as always, we'll end this video with a Tabtarian toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte. Ooh, crushed it. So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. And the biggest mistake that I've made as a game master in every game that I started playing, from when I started playing D&D, is that I tried to make things too complex at the jump, at the start. I was trying to make them these amazing fantasy tales that people would like be teleported to Middle Earth or another. No, I'm stupid. I'm gonna start over. This is dumb. Here we go.
The intro was a little complicated. Can you simplify?
It really was. It really was. I thought that the intro was way too complicated, which is just the proof that
That is such a good way to put it.
This might be the end card.
I do really like that.
So yeah, here we go again.